Take her sidearm. No questions. The command came low but sharp, carried across the salty air at the edge of the Pacific training grounds like a blade glancing off steel. 4 petty officers moved instantly, circling the woman at the center of the line. To anyone watching, she was just another candidate, another body in the Navy's grueling advanced combat evaluation program. But the order was anything but routine. Over the next 83 seconds, everything would shift. Reputations would fracture. Assumptions would collapse. And Lieutenant Commander Hannah Rourke, a woman whose file read more like a half-finished puzzle than a service record, would become something the Navy had no protocol for. Before that moment, she was just a quiet candidate from administrative transfer. By the time the clock stopped, she would be something else entirely. This is her story, or at least the version that still exists in open channels. The rest sits buried under clearance levels that don't officially exist. Wrapped in files marked Obsidian Protocol, the convoy rolled through the coastal access gate into Naval Amphibious Base Trident. Late afternoon sunlight painted the asphalt. In shimmering waves, the air thick with brine and jet fuel drifting from the nearby airstrip. 21 candidates were inside the 3 armored transport trucks, each one assigned to Class Delta 7 for final selection. Most wore identical. Expressions: tight jaws, restless eyes, hearts kicking at their rib cages. They were the best of their commands, hand-picked for skills most sailors never needed. But Lieutenant Jonah Maddox, observing from the elevated catwalk above the training grounds, spotted something that didn't fit. One of the arrivals looked. Wrong dot. She stepped out of the truck, wearing non-issue boots, plain khaki cargo pants, and a simple navy blue shirt instead of the prep gear everyone else wore. No unit patch, no visible rank. Her hair was pulled back in a neat but unremarkable braid, the kind you'd expect on someone about to do paperwork, not run an obstacle course. But Maddox noticed her eyes. She didn't scan the compound like the others. No awe, no hesitation, no quick glances for orientation. She looked once, long enough to map exits, blind corners, sight lines. It was the kind of survey you see from intelligence officers, not fresh transfers. Her file, which Maddox had reviewed that morning, was unsettling in its simplicity. 7 pages, no medals, no combat citations. A few vague postings to logistics coordination in foreign stations. The only thing unusual was a single line buried in the clearance section. Previous access level, Obsidian Tier, Archival. Meant gone. People on that list were either retired into anonymity or never made it home. Seeing it next to a living, breathing candidate was unprecedented. Commander Isla Warren, who oversaw the Delta 7 program, had noticed it too. She'd spent her career filtering through files padded with fluff or stripped to bare bones for security. But something about this one had gnawed at her since it crossed her desk. Now, seeing the woman step into formation, Warren's unease sharpened. Name? She asked, standing beside Maddox. Hannah Rourke, he replied. Transferred from a stateside admin posting. Warren didn't look convinced. And Maddox hesitated. And she moves like she's been here before. That first day, the candidates were driven hard. Orientation briefings, physical baseline testing, and weapons familiarization. The sun was a punishing overseer, and the sea breeze did nothing to ease the heat. During the weapons drill, they were issued the M27 infantry automatic rifle, field stripped to its components. The task? Clean and reassemble in under 15 minutes. For most, the process was a sweaty, clumsy affair. When Rourke's turn came, she approached the weapon with hesitation. At least, that's how it looked. Her fingers moved slowly, uncertainly, until Maddox, watching from the side, noticed the rhythm. Every motion was deliberate, but too smooth for someone learning. Her hesitation wasn't real. She was acting. 6 minutes and 12 seconds later, the M27 was reassembled perfectly. No jam points. No extra oil. Bolt seated with a soft click, she placed it down without a word. Petty Officer Cole Vance, supervising the drill, chalked it up to luck. But Maddox's gut twisted Dot by the third day. The unspoken tension between Rourke and the instructors had begun to harden into something sharper. During the combat conditioning run, she clocked the same pace every single time. 7 minutes, 48 seconds per mile. Not pushing, not dragging. Perfectly repeatable. Maddox had seen strong runners, but no one maintained exact times like that without deliberate pacing or calibration. Petty Officer Second Class Lena Caro, one of the other candidates, noticed too. Caro wasn't a talker. She'd grown. Up with 4 older brothers, and learned early that silence heard more than words. She'd been watching Rourke since day one, unsettled by the way the woman blended in without trying. "She's not like us," Caro muttered during water break. "What do you mean?" Another recruit asked. Caro shook her head. "She's not learning this stuff. She's remembering it." The moment that solidified the whispers came on day 5 at the shooting range. Targets were set at standard qual distances. The other. Recruits fired in erratic patterns, some good, some barely scraping passable. Rourke stepped to the line with the M27. Her stance was perfect, her breathing textbook. But her trigger pulls were spaced oddly, almost too slow, as if she didn't want to look too good. Dot when the ceasefire was called, Maddox walked downrange with Vance. The target wasn't peppered with holes. It had one. A single ragged tear dead center in the bullseye, where every shot had passed through the same space. Vance's face went pale. In 2 decades, he'd seen groupings like that, from maybe 3 people, all of them special operations. Snipers whose missions didn't officially exist. But Maddox said nothing. The rest of the instructors didn't press it either. And Rourke? She stepped back into line, as if she'd done nothing remarkable. Hand-to-hand drills came next. The instructors paired candidates by size and weight. Rourke, lean and average. In build, was matched with a former collegiate linebacker named O'Keefe. The first exchange went exactly as taught, or so it seemed. But Maddox caught the micro-adjustment, the way her hips shifted half a second before contact, the way her grip locked not on the joint she was told to grab, but on the point that would unbalance O'Keefe instantly. He hit the mat hard. Dot when the instructor told her to use more force, less finesse. She nodded. But the nod didn't mean yes. It meant I've fought people you've never met. Every day, Maddox's unease grew. She didn't react to provocation. She didn't display fatigue. She didn't try to outshine anyone, but she didn't hide enough to blend completely. Either. By week 2, Caro began quietly timing her sparring matches, her mile runs, even her hydration breaks. Every number was consistent. Maddox wasn't sure whether she was training or testing the people around her. And then, on the night before the infamous 5-on-1 combat retention drill, Maddox overheard Commander Warren speaking quietly too. "The Master Chief. Obsidian Tier," she said. "Archival. You know what that means." The Master Chief shook his head. "We don't have the clearance to know what that means." Warren's eyes shifted toward the barracks where Rourke slept. "Then tomorrow we'll find out the hard way." The announcement came without warning. It was well past lights out when the candidates were roused by the bark of Petty Officer Vance echoing through the barracks. Boots hit the deck. Cots squealed against metal frames. In less than a minute, every candidate stood in formation. Half awake but adrenaline sharp. Commander Warren emerged from the shadows, hands clasped behind her back, the Pacific wind teasing strands of her dark hair loose from regulation bun. Her voice was even, but it cut like wire. "Tomorrow," she began, "we separate those who belong here from those who don't." She let the words breathe, scanning faces. Then her eyes locked on Rourke. "Lieutenant Commander Hannah Rourke, you've been struggling with basic competencies since day one." The tone was surgical. "So here's your chance to prove you're more than a transfer mistake. You will enter the ring against 5 of our best. No weapons, no breaks, no second chances. Survive 30 seconds, and you pass." A ripple of low whistles and mutters moved through the line. Everyone knew what this was. A retention drill. Officially, it was a training assessment. Unofficially, it was public execution for anyone the cadre wanted gone. No one had ever beaten it. "You'll have medical on standby," Warren added, her gaze hardening. "You'll need it." The commander stepped back into darkness. Rourke didn't flinch. She didn't speak. But Caro, 2 paces to her left, saw it. The faintest trace of a smile at the corner of her mouth dot by morning. The entire Delta 7 compound knew. Candidates from other classes found reasons to be there. Sailors from maintenance units happened to be passing by. Corpsmen stood by with trauma kits open, gloves on. Even the base XO, Captain Velez, leaned on the perimeter fence, sunglasses hiding his eyes. He'd read Rourke's file twice before breakfast. The sun sat high, reflecting off the hard-packed sand of the combat pit. Inside, 5 men warmed up, stretching and rotating joints. They weren't random picks. Each had been selected for a different skill set. Chief Petty Officer Briggs, power striker, former Golden Gloves champ. Petty Officer First Class Mendez, speed, small unit tactics. Petty Officer Kyle Ricks, grappler, ground control specialist. Lieutenant Junior, grade Sloan, calculated precision, intelligence trained. Petty Officer Marcus Cole, endurance fighter, relentless pressure. They moved with the casual arrogance of men who knew the outcome before the bell rang. Rourke stepped into the pit, rolling her sleeves to her elbows. The scars along her forearms caught the sunlight, some thin and white from years past, others jagged and newer. Shrapnel marks, blade cuts, surgical incisions. Maddox, standing near the medics, felt a cold shiver travel down his spine. 30 seconds, Vance announced, raising a stopwatch. "Begin on my whistle." The circle tightened. Briggs came first, a bull rush of pure muscle. His plan was simple. Hit her so hard the others wouldn't even need to step in. But at the last instant, Rourke shifted, not back, but sideways, a precise 8 inches. Her palm landed at the base of his neck. It wasn't a shove. It was a trigger. Briggs collapsed, his legs folding beneath him as his momentum died mid-stride. Before his knees hit sand, Mendez was already there, slicing in from her left with a high-speed combination aimed at her ribs and jaw. She slipped inside his reach, hooked her arm through his, and rolled her shoulder into his sternum. Air left him in a rush. He hit the ground gasping. Ricks came low, aiming to wrap her legs. But she'd moved before he committed, stepping onto his shoulder and pushing off, landing behind him. Her forearm slid under his chin in a chokehold that lasted barely half a second before she released, letting him slump unconscious to the ground. About only 13 seconds had passed. Cole and Sloan exchanged a quick glance. Sloan feinted right while Cole charged from the front. For the first time, Rourke didn't move away. She advanced at her elbow, smashed into Sloan's forearm before his strike landed, numbing his arm instantly. A half pivot brought her heel into Cole's thigh, just above the knee, a precise strike to the femoral nerve cluster. Cole's leg gave way, and he crashed sideways, cursing. Sloan, shaking feeling back into his arm, hesitated. His mind was recalculating. This wasn't a fight anymore. This was surgery in motion. 17 seconds. Maddox had stopped breathing. He wasn't watching a brawl. He was watching language made of violence, a dialect no manual had ever printed. Every move was economy itself. No wasted motion. No hesitation. She wasn't winning. She was editing the fight, cutting away everything that wasn't necessary. Cole was down. Briggs was trying to stand, but failing. Mendez wheezed on hands and knees. Ricks lay flat, eyes closed. Only Sloane remained upright, but his stance wavered. He took one step forward, then stopped. His gaze met hers. "I yield," he said, voice barely audible. For 3 full seconds, the pit was silent, but for the gulls circling overhead. Then Vance's voice cracked the air. "Time, 28 seconds." Rourke didn't celebrate. She didn't even look at the crowd now swelling at the perimeter. She moved from man to man, checking pupils, helping them roll to their sides, tapping Mendez's back until his breathing steadied. Only when she was sure no one was permanently injured did she leave the pit, walking the same calm, unhurried pace. She had the day she arrived. The applause began slowly. Caro first, then Maddox, then others. Not cheering a victory, but acknowledging a truth they'd all missed until now. From the observation platform, Commander Warren exhaled. Under her breath, she said it so only Captain Valets could hear. "She's not a candidate. She's a survivor. From something we buried." Elise didn't look at her. "Then the question is, why is she here now?" That night, Rourke's name disappeared from the candidate roster. Officially, she was reassigned. Unofficially, rumors whispered through the base like tidewater against the seawall. Some said she'd been brought back to train a special detachment. Others claimed she was part of an experimental unit the Navy had tried to erase. Only Maddox and Warren knew the real truth, and they weren't talking. What they couldn't change was the memory. 83 seconds that rewrote the limits of what one person could do. The night after the grueling drills was unusually quiet. Rain pattered softly against the tin roofs of the barracks, a rhythmic sound that seemed almost soothing after the chaos of the day. But for Ava, there was no rest. She lay in her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every mocking laugh, every sneer from her fellow recruits. She clenched her jaw. "I will not break." Not here. Dot from across the room. Muffled whispers drifted through the dim light. Johnson and Rivera were at it again, muttering insults just loud enough for her to hear. She ignored them, but her fingers curled into fists beneath the thin blanket. The door creaked open, and in stepped Petty Officer Malone, their unit's training supervisor. His voice was low, but carried authority. "Lights out means silence." "Gentlemen," he said, his eyes sweeping the room. They landed on Ava briefly, unreadable, before he stepped back outside Dot as soon as the door shut. Rivera smirked and whispered, "Teacher's pet?" Ava exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. She had learned long ago that reacting only fed their cruelty. Morning brought no mercy. The rain had turned the training field into a swamp of mud and standing water. Chief Harding had them lined. Up at dawn, barking orders with a voice that could split steel. "Today," he announced, "we see who can push past their limits. There will be no easy passes. If you can't keep up, you'll be sent packing." The challenge was clear. They would run the endurance course twice while carrying full packs and rifles. No breaks. The whistle blew, and they were off. Ava's boots sank deep into the mud, each step a battle. Around her, recruits grunted, cursed, and shoved their way through the course. She kept her pace steady, conserving energy for the second lap. Halfway through the first run, Johnson accidentally bumped her shoulder, sending her stumbling into the muck. She went down hard, her knees slamming into the ground. Pain shot up her leg, but she pushed herself up without a word. Caught Harding's gaze across the field. He didn't call out or help. He simply watched. Expression unreadable. By the time the first lap ended, several recruits were already gasping for air. Ava tightened the straps of her pack and started the second run without hesitation. Every muscle screamed in protest, but she focused on the rhythm of her breathing. Step, step, breath. As she rounded a bend, she noticed Rivera ahead, slowing down. The mud was pulling at his legs, his stamina faltering. Ava could have passed him without a thought, but then she saw him slip, his rifle nearly sinking into the mire. For a split second, she hesitated. Helping him could cost her precious time, but leaving him could mean a disciplinary mark for the whole unit. She reached down, yanked him up, and shoved the rifle back into his arms. "Move," she said simply. Rivera stared at her, surprised. Before running again, they crossed the finish line minutes later, Ava only a step behind the lead runners. She collapsed to one knee, gulping air, her chest burning. Harding walked over, his boots splashing in the mud. He looked at Rivera first. "Lucky someone was watching your back, recruit." Then his eyes moved to Ava. "You could have taken the lead," he said quietly, almost like an observation to himself. Ava met his gaze. "We're supposed to be a team, sir." For a moment, something flickered in Harding's expression. Respect. Maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it came. That night, Rivera didn't speak to her. Neither did Johnson. But the way they looked at her had shifted, just a little. The pure malice in their eyes had dulled, replaced by something more cautious. In the mess hall, Ava sat alone at the far table, spooning tasteless chow into her mouth. The noise of clanging trays and loud conversations filled the room. Suddenly, a shadow fell across her table. "Mind if I sit?" It was Lieutenant Grace Miller, one of the few female officers in the base. She was tall, sharp-eyed, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought her way to every promotion. Ava nodded hesitantly. "I've been watching your progress," Miller said, lowering her voice. "You've got grit." "Not many do." Ava blinked, unsure how to respond. Praise was rare here, and trust even rarer. Miller leaned in slightly. "You ever think about why they push you so hard?" Ava frowned. "Because I'm the weakest link?" Miller shook her head. "Because they want to see if you'll break, or if you'll become someone they can count on when it matters." Before Ava could ask what she meant, Miller stood, smoothing her uniform. "Keep your head down and your eyes open, recruit. Sometimes the real test isn't in the drills, it's in the moments no one warns you about." 2 days later, those words would come back to Ava. It was just past midnight when the siren blared across the base. The recruits scrambled out of their bunks, grabbing boots and gear as instructors barked for them to assemble. "Simulated emergency," Harding announced. "Hostile boarding drill. This is not a game. Fail here, and you fail in the field." They were divided into squads and given orders: secure the armory, sweep the corridors, and detain the intruders before they reached the command center. Ava's squad moved through the darkened hallways, rifles raised, eyes scanning every shadow. The base was eerily quiet, except for the occasional echo of boots on metal. As they approached the lower deck, a figure lunged from a side corridor. One of the instructors, playing the role of an intruder. Chaos erupted. Shots of blank rounds rang out, voices shouted orders, and in the confusion, one recruit froze completely. It was Johnson. His rifle hung limp in his hands, his eyes wide with panic. Ava didn't think. She shoved him behind cover, took his position, and returned fire until the intruder was neutralized. When the drill ended, Harding called them all to attention. His voice was firm, but not cold. "Some of you held your ground, some of you didn't, and some of you His eyes landed on Ava, stepped up when it counted. No applause followed. No smiles. Just a nod from Harding before he dismissed them. That night, Ava lay in her bunk again, but this time, the whispers were gone. The room was quiet, except for the steady sound of rain. She closed her eyes, her body aching, but for the first time since arriving, she felt like she belonged. The weeks that followed were a blur of sweat, steel, and salt water. The USS Sentinel cut through the Pacific like a blade, carrying the recruits deeper into the crucible of their training. For most, it was an adventure. For Claire, it was a battlefield. Where her own past waged war against her, the Navy didn't allow much time for reflection. The days began at 0500 with the sharp blare of the bosun's pipe. Push-ups on the steel deck as the morning wind tore at their uniforms. Obstacle courses that tested every muscle and every nerve. Hours in the pool, simulating rescues in churning water, dragging sandbags the size of bodies. Claire kept her head down, speaking only when necessary, letting her work speak for her. But the more she proved herself, the more her presence seemed to irritate certain members of the squad, especially Petty Officer Calloway. Calloway was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried the kind of smirk that came from never having been told no in his life. He had made it his personal mission to undermine her. A misplaced tool in the engine bay? He'd loudly accuse her. A faulty rope line during drills? He'd mutter that she was a liability. Always in a voice just loud enough for others. To hear Dot, it didn't help that Claire still carried the scars from her past deployment jacket, reminders on her arms and shoulder from the explosion in the Gulf. She kept them covered when she could. But aboard a ship, there was no hiding forever. One night, after a grueling 12-hour shift maintaining the ship's auxiliary systems, Claire stepped into the galley to grab coffee before her next watch. The room was mostly empty, except for Calloway and two of his friends, leaning against the counter. "Well, well," Calloway drawled. "Look who's here. Thought I smelled burned rubber." His eyes flicked to the pale line of a scar peeking from her sleeve. "You know, some of us actually earned our place here. Others just got dragged along by pity." His friends chuckled. Claire poured her coffee slowly, steadying her hands, refusing to take the bait. "Nothing to say?" Calloway prodded. "Or did they burn the words right out of you, too?" "They?" Ceramic mug cracked in her grip. She didn't break eye contact, but her voice was like steel. "Careful, Calloway. Some of us know what real fire feels like." The room fell silent for a beat. Then, with a tight smile, she left, her boots echoing on the metal deck. The next morning brought no reprieve. The Sentinel was entering a high-intensity training phase, night operations drills. These were notorious for pushing recruits to their breaking point navigation in darkness, stealth boarding exercises, and live fire accuracy tests under minimal light. Chief Petty Officer Harland gathered them on deck. "Tonight's drill will simulate an emergency boarding of a hostile vessel. You'll be split into fire teams. Remember speed, silence, and precision. Failure isn't an option." Claire was assigned to Fire Team Bravo, alongside Calloway. His smirk told her everything. He was going to make this difficult. The drill began under a moonless sky. Clad in black fatigues, they slipped into the rigid-hull inflatable boat, waves slapping the sides. Claire took point on the approach, her eyes locked on the silhouette of the mock target ship. Halfway there, Calloway, accidentally, dropped his sidearm into the water. The boat halted as he cursed loudly, alerting the instructors on the target. Vessel, the simulated enemy, began moving into defensive positions. "Move, move," Claire hissed, grabbing the rope ladder. She climbed quickly, hauling herself onto the deck. But the element of surprise was gone. Blank rounds cracked in the dark as the enemy role players engaged them. Claire ducked behind a crate, scanning for her team. Calloway was still at the ladder. Fumbling, she had a choice. Leave him and complete the objective, or go back for him. With a silent curse, she sprinted back, grabbing his harness and dragging him over the railing. "Stay with me and keep your head down," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. They made it to the target room together, clearing it with precision. When the drill ended, Harlan's voice rang out, "Bravo, Team Fail. Loss of stealth and delayed execution." Claire said nothing. Calloway muttered something about slippery ladders and walked away without so much as a thank you. 2 days later, the storm hit. It rolled in from the west, a wall of black clouds and roaring wind. The sentinel groaned under the onslaught, waves crashing over her bow. Recruits scrambled to secure loose gear, water soaking them to the bone. Claire was assigned to damage control in the lower decks. The air was hot and thick with diesel fumes. She worked with Petty Officer Vega, patching a burst pipe that threatened to flood the compartment. Then came the alarm man overboard. Her heart seized. On deck, chaos reigned. Calloway was missing. He had been part of the crew securing the aft. Lines when a wave had swept him away. Without thinking, Claire grabbed a harness and clipped into the safety line. "I'm going in," she shouted to Harlan. The sea was a living monster, tossing her like a ragdoll. She dove beneath each wave, searching for any sign of him. Finally there. A flash of movement in the foam. Calloway's head bobbed above. The water, his arms flailing. She reached him, locking an arm around his chest. "Stop fighting me," she yelled. He was panicked, half-drowned, but she kept her grip, kicking hard toward the retrieval line. By the time they were hauled aboard, both were shivering violently. Calloway collapsed on the deck, coughing seawater. For the first time since they'd met, he looked at her with something that wasn't contempt. It was. Shane. Later, in the sick bay, he sat on the edge of the cot while she dried her hair with a towel. "Why?" he asked hoarsely. "After everything I've said to you, why would you come after me?" Claire met his gaze, her voice quiet but firm. "Because that's what we do. We don't leave anyone behind." He swallowed hard, nodding. No more smirk. No more mockery. Just silence. But as she walked out into the storm-soaked corridors, Claire knew this was only one battle won. The real war, the one inside her, was far from over. The days leading up to the final assessment were a strange blend of relentless activity and suffocating tension. By now, every recruit in Echo Company knew Olivia's name, and not just because of her scars. She had become a quiet, almost stubborn symbol of endurance. But symbols, she knew, had a dangerous tendency to draw fire. Chief Miller's attitude toward her hadn't softened much in public. If anything, he doubled down on the physical challenges. "You want to prove you belong here. Recruit? Then you'll do it with no special treatment." He barked on a Tuesday morning as they stood in formation under a slate-gray sky. His words were sharp, but for the first time, Olivia sensed there was something almost calculated about his tone. Like he wanted her to keep proving herself. The recruits were deep into naval operations drills now, boarding simulations, weapon disassembly under time pressure, tactical swimming in open water. The sea was rough that week, and more than one recruit left the pool, coughing up salt water after being tossed from the mock vessel. Olivia wasn't spared. During one drill, she was knocked under by the force of a wave generator and had to fight her way up through the turbulence, lungs screaming for air, but she didn't quit. Not once. The nights were worse. In the barracks, whispers spread. Some of the same recruits who had mocked her before now kept their distance, uneasy with the idea that someone they'd underestimated so badly was consistently outperforming them. Still, she wasn't without allies. Corporal Ramirez, a wiry recruit from San Diego, had started casually eating at her table in the mess hall. He didn't talk much, but his presence alone warded off most trouble. On Thursday night, just 3 days before the final assessment, a storm swept in from the coast. The instructors didn't cancel training. Instead, they marched the company down to the docks for nighttime navigation drills in full gear. The wind howled so hard it rattled the flagpoles, and rain stung their faces like needles. Tonight's about finding your way when the world's trying to push you off course. Chief Miller shouted over the roar of the storm. Follow your compass. Trust your instincts. Stay with your team, or you're done. The exercise was brutal. Each squad had to navigate through the dark pier, board a vessel, secure its cargo, and return without losing anyone to the water. Olivia's squad drew one of the farthest routes, meaning they'd spend the longest in the storm. Halfway through, disaster struck. A rope bridge between two sections of the dock had slickened into a death trap. One of her squad mates, Harper, slipped and lost his footing. His scream was swallowed by the wind as he dangled over black, churning water. Olivia didn't think. She dropped to her knees, gripping the rope with one hand and reaching out with the other. The rain made everything slippery, and Harper's panic made him thrash wildly. "Stop moving," she shouted, her voice cutting through the gale. "I've got you." Her arm burned as she hauled him back up, water streaming from his soaked uniform. The rest of the squad stared for a moment, then scrambled to help secure the bridge. No one said a word, but something changed in the air dot by the time they made it back to base. Drenched and exhausted, Olivia felt the weight of eyes on her. Not mocking, not pitying, watching. Measuring dot the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the base under a washed-out blue sky. The final assessment was announced, a 24-hour endurance operation, simulating a real-world maritime recovery mission. Recruits would be pushed to their limits physically and mentally, with no rest and minimal rations. That night, Olivia sat on her bunk, staring at the scars on her hands. She'd carried them for so long that she'd stopped questioning them. They were just her. But here, among these recruits and instructors, they had become a challenge she was forced to answer every day. She wasn't sure yet if she was winning, but she knew she was still standing. Somewhere down the hall, she heard laughter. Not the mocking kind. The barracks had shifted, subtly but undeniably, since the storm. Whether they liked it or not, the others were starting to see her as part of the unit. When lights went out, Olivia lay awake, listening to the steady hum of the ventilation system. The final challenge loomed like a dark horizon. She didn't know what waited there, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't the same woman who had walked through those gates on day one. And when the moment came, she'd meet it head-on. Evelyn sat alone in the dimly lit barracks, her hands resting on the wooden bunk, fingers curled loosely, as if they could barely remember what it was like to clench into fists. Outside, the wind howled against the thin metal siding, rattling. The windows like loose teeth. The air carried the smell of salt and the faint hum of diesel engines from the Navy dock nearby. She stared at her boots on the floor, perfectly polished, laces even, toes sharp, but her mind was far from the barracks. A day had passed since the grueling training where she had finally confronted Harris, the recruit who had been her loudest critic. The physical exhaustion had been bad enough, but the emotional drain, that was worse. His words had lingered, digging at old wounds that had never really healed. But she had done what she came here to do, survive, endure, and prove herself. The door creaked open, and a shadow fell across the room. Captain Ross stepped in, shutting the door behind him. His expression was unreadable, as always, but his eyes swept over Evelyn, as if assessing the damage from a distance. "Stand up, petty officer," he said, his voice calm but commanding. Evelyn rose to her feet immediately, back straight, eyes forward. "Yes, sir." Ross crossed his arms. Tomorrow morning, at 0600, you'll be reporting to the pier. There's been a change in your assignment." Her chest tightened. "A change, sir?" He nodded once. "You've been recommended for advanced maritime combat training. A small unit, 6 men, 1 woman. They run special operation scenarios, simulating hostage rescues, shipboarding, and underwater demolition. You'll be tested harder than before, mentally, physically, and you won't be coddled." Evelyn almost laughed. The idea of being coddled in the Navy was absurd, but she stayed silent. "Understood, sir." Ross's gaze sharpened. "This isn't just about your skill, petty officer. This is about how the Navy views you. You've been under a microscope since day one. They want to see if you can lead under pressure, or if you'll break." She felt the weight of his words like a sandbag on her shoulders. This wasn't just another training round. This was her career on the line. The next morning, the cold wind off the Atlantic hit her like a wall when she stepped onto the pier. The sky was a bruised gray, the water restless with whitecaps. The small unit was already assembled, each in black wetsuits with their names stenciled in white across their chests. Harris was there. Of course, his expression was unreadable now. Gone was the smug grin, replaced by something she couldn't quite read. Maybe respect. Maybe just calculation. Their new commanding officer, Lieutenant Briggs, stepped forward. He was a tall man with a voice like gravel and eyes that scanned like radar. "Listen up," Briggs barked. "Today we're running a boarding exercise. You'll approach from the water, climb a moving vessel, secure the deck, and neutralize all threats. You'll work in pairs. You succeed as a team or fail as a team, and if you fail," his gaze swept over them, "you swim back." The cold water slapped at Evelyn's legs as she waded in, the chill biting instantly through her wetsuit. Her partner for the drill was Harris, an intentional choice by Briggs, she was sure. The two of them moved in sync toward the target. Ship, a rusted cargo vessel chugging slowly along the bay. The waves fought them, but they kept their strokes strong, reaching the hull just as the ship's shadow loomed overhead. Harris signaled, and they began the climb. The wet rope was slick under their gloves, but Evelyn's grip held firm. She'd spent months strengthening her arms for this, knowing full well that any slip could be used as ammunition against her. They reached the deck and burst over the railing. The threats, instructors in padded gear, moved fast, but Evelyn moved faster. She ducked under a swinging baton, drove her shoulder into one opponent's ribs, and twisted the weapon from his hands in a single motion. Harris took down the second man with a swift sweep of his legs. The exercise ended in under a minute. Briggs's voice came over the radio. "Good, very good. Get ready for round 2. Round 2 wasn't on the deck. It was in the engine room. A maze of metal pipes, deafening noise, and stifling heat. Their mission, secure the area without damaging the machinery. Sweat poured down Evelyn's back as they moved through the narrow corridors. Harris covered her flank without a word. And for the first time, she realized they were moving like a single unit. Whatever had existed between them before, tension, resentment, hostility, had burned away in the fire of the mission. They cleared the room and signaled completion. Briggs was waiting when they climbed back to the deck. "Solid work," he said. "You're starting to look like a team." Evelyn glanced at Harris. He met her eyes briefly, then looked away. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. That night, the unit gathered in the mess hall. The atmosphere was lighter than usual, laughter and chatter echoing against the metal walls. Evelyn sat at the edge of the table, quietly eating her meal, when Harris slid his tray down across from hers. "You did good today," he said simply. She raised an eyebrow. "That's the first nice thing you've said to me since we met." He smirked. Faintly. Don't get used to it. But there was no venom in his voice. 3 days later, during an offshore night exercise, the storm hit. It came without warning. One moment the sea was calm. The next it was a churning black monster. Rain pelted their faces like needles. Wind screaming so loud it drowned out the engine noise. Briggs's voice was tense over the radio. "Unit, we've got a problem. One of the trainees is missing. Last seen on the starboard side. Find them, now." Evelyn's stomach dropped. Without hesitation, she grabbed a lifeline and clipped it to her harness. Harris was right behind her. They fought their way along the slick deck, waves crashing over the railing. The missing trainee, Seaman Ortiz, was clinging to a loose section of netting, his face pale with terror. The next wave could easily rip him free. Evelyn didn't think. She lunged, grabbing his arm just as a wall of water smashed into them. Her grip almost slipped, but Harris's hand locked around her harness, anchoring them both. Together, they hauled Ortiz back to safety. They finally staggered inside. Dripping and shivering, Briggs was waiting. His eyes swept over them, and for the first time, he nodded in approval. "You three just earned your place here," he said. That night, Evelyn sat on her bunk, her hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the realization of what had just happened. She had gone from the target of ridicule to someone her unit could rely on when it mattered most. For the first time since stepping into the Navy, she allowed herself to believe she truly belonged. The rain had turned from a steady drizzle into a punishing downpour. The ocean beyond the naval base's dock was churning violently, white-capped waves smashing against the pilings. Floodlights lit the shoreline like daylight, their beams cutting through the mist and spray. In the distance, a bell clanged in the wind, echoing like an omen. Lieutenant Commander Mason stood at the pier's edge, hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. Next to him, Chief Petty Officer Daniels barked orders at a line of soaked recruits, their uniforms plastered to their bodies. The smell of salt water mixed with diesel from the idling patrol boats nearby. "Listen up," Daniels roared over the wind. "This is your final field assessment. You fail here, you're out. You succeed," his eyes narrowed on Harper. "You earn your place." Harper's heart pounded. Her uniform clung uncomfortably to her skin, water dripping from the brim of her cap. She'd come a long way since that first day, since the mockery, the stares, the whispered insults. But she also knew the final test was designed to break even the strongest. Mason's voice carried through the rain, calm yet commanding. "Tonight, you're going to conduct a search and recovery operation. Your objective: locate and retrieve a classified device lost during a simulated covert mission." He gestured toward the stormy waters. "It's out there." Some of the recruits exchanged uneasy glances. Diving in those conditions was dangerous. Currents were unpredictable. Visibility would be almost non-existent. And if the rumors were true, the lost device was hidden far beneath the surface. "This isn't about swimming," Mason continued. "It's about discipline, teamwork, and composure under extreme pressure. You'll have 20 minutes from the moment you enter the water." A recruit named Ferris muttered, 20 minutes? In that, you'll drown before you find anything." Daniels shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "Then don't come back up without it." Harper's breathing steadied. She knew she could handle cold water and strong currents. Her childhood summers on the coast of Maine had taught her that. But this was different. She'd be diving in the dead of night, in the middle of a storm, surrounded by people who still doubted her. "Teams of 2, Mason ordered. "Pair up." Harper immediately felt the familiar tension ripple through the group nobody wanted to partner with her. She caught sight of Reynolds, the recruit who'd been her only occasional ally. But before she could move toward him, Daniels assigned pairs. She ended up with Ferris. Ferris looked at her like someone had just handed him a ticking time bomb. "Don't slow me down," he snapped. "I won't," Harper said simply. The teens suited up in wetsuits, pulling on oxygen tanks and strapping waterproof flashlights to their wrists. The rain pelted harder, the sound drumming on the dock like 1,000 war drums. Mason's voice cut through the chaos one final time. "Remember, failure here means you walk away without the uniform." Daniels blew his whistle. "Go!" The recruits leapt from the pier, one after another, disappearing into the black water. Harper plunged in last, the icy shock hitting her like a wall. For a moment, the cold stole her breath, but she forced herself to focus. The beam from her wrist light sliced through the darkness, illuminating swirls of sand and shadow. Ferris kicked hard ahead of her. "Keep up!" He barked through his cum unit. They swam toward the coordinates Mason had given them, fighting the surge. The deeper they went, the more the ocean swallowed the light. Shapes loomed in the gloom-jagged rocks, patches of seaweed that clutched at their legs like hands. Every few seconds, Harper checked her dive gauge. Oxygen steady, depth increasing. Shadow passed above. At first she thought it was another team, but then it moved faster, larger. Her stomach tightened. It was probably just a large fish, but out here, you never knew. They reached the search zone. Ferris swept his light back and forth, scanning the seafloor. "Nothing," he muttered. "Look over there," Harper pointed to a narrow crevice between two boulders. Ferris frowned, but followed her. The current was stronger here, pulling them off balance. Harper gripped the rock face, pushing herself forward. Something metallic glinted in the light, a small sealed container wedged deep in the gap. "There," she said. Ferris wedged himself in beside her and tugged, but the container wouldn't budge. "It's stuck." Harper signaled him to move. Aside, she braced her feet, gripped the edges, and twisted hard. The container shifted, just enough for her to wrench it free. "Got it," she said, holding it close. Suddenly, Ferris's flashlight beam swung wildly. "Wait, something's behind us." Harper turned, her light revealing a cloud of disturbed sand swirling around a dark shape moving fast. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even one of the large fish she'd imagined earlier. It was a massive stingray, startled by their presence, its tail lashing dangerously. "Move!" Ferris yelled. They kicked away, but the current shoved them back toward the rocks. Harper's oxygen gauge was dipping too much time spent wrestling the container. She signaled Ferris to ascend, and they shot upward, the water growing slightly. Lighter until at last they broke the surface, gasping for air. The storm hit them full force again. The dock was barely visible through the sheets of rain. Ferris grabbed the container and began swimming toward it. Harper followed, her muscles burning with effort. When they finally reached the pier, Daniels hauled them up, dripping and exhausted. Mason stepped forward, his gaze landing on the container. "Mission complete," Ferris panted, shoving it into Mason's hands. "Thanks to me." Harper didn't argue. She'd learned by now that proving herself didn't come from shouting. The truth in the moment. Mason's eyes flicked from Ferris to her, lingering a beat longer than necessary. He knew. The other teams surfaced one by one, some empty-handed, others dragging themselves up barely conscious from fatigue. Out of 6 pairs, only 2 including. Harper's had found the device. Daniels lined them up, rainwater running down his face. "That's it. The evaluation is over." A hush fell as Mason stepped forward. "Some of you have shown me you can be sailors. Some have not. Those who didn't make the cut will be processed out tomorrow." Harper's chest tightened. This was the moment. Mason began calling out names, those staying, those leaving. Each word felt like a drumbeat. When he reached Harper, there was a pause. "Recruit Harper, Mason said, his voice carrying over the wind. "You're staying." A wave of relief surged through her, almost knocking her off her feet. She didn't smile discipline forbade it, but her shoulders loosened. She'd made it. But as the recruits dispersed, Mason called her aside. His expression was unreadable. "You did well tonight," he said quietly. "Not just in the water. You've been under fire since day one more than most. You've kept your head down, done the work, and proven yourself without tearing anyone else down." "Thank you, sir," Harper said. "This," Mason said, tapping the container she'd retrieved, "was your mission. I know Ferris didn't pull it free." Harper's eyes met his. "Does it matter, sir?" A faint smile tugged at his lips. "It matters to me." As she walked back toward the barracks, soaked to the bone and trembling from exhaustion, Harper realized something had shifted. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was part of this part of the Navy, and no amount of mockery could take that away. The storm rolled in from the horizon like a living thing, churning the waters beyond the base. By early afternoon, dark clouds draped over the naval compound, and the wind whistled through the gaps in the barracks siding. It wasn't the weather that made everyone tense, though. It was the upcoming operation. Captain Harris's orders had been explicit. Tomorrow, at 0400, the recruits would deploy to assist in a joint maritime security exercise. Only this was no exercise for the intel team. The rumors had started trickling down to the recruits by lunchtime. There had been suspicious vessel activity detected near international waters, and the Navy was going to intercept. No one knew whether it was smugglers, a foreign vessel testing boundaries, or something worse. Sergeant Kane didn't like rumors, but he liked seeing fear in untested recruits even less. That evening, he gathered the entire squad in the mess hall, his voice steady despite the rattling windows. "You'll hear things tonight," Kane began, pacing the floor. "Some will be true, most will be garbage. What matters is that you keep your head clear. Tomorrow you follow orders. You trust your training. You trust your team." Clara sat toward the back, arms crossed, eyes fixed on him. She could feel that same old weight in the room. Half of them still didn't respect her, but lately the open mockery had faded. The incident with the obstacle course, where she'd pulled Jenkins from the water after he froze, had changed something. Even so, trust in the Navy was earned over years, not weeks. Kane's gaze swept over the room and landed on her for a split second longer than the others. It wasn't pity. It was acknowledgement. Clara sat up straighter. When the meeting broke up, most recruits filed back to their bunks. Outside, the rain had started in earnest, cold drops pelting the tarmac. Clara was halfway to her own barracks when she heard footsteps behind her. "Hey," came a voice. She turned. It was Jenkins, the same recruit who once laughed the loudest at her scars. He was holding something in his hand, a small waterproof pouch. He shifted awkwardly. "You dropped this earlier." She frowned. "No, I didn't." He scratched the back of his neck, embarrassed. "All right, fine. I just wanted to say thanks for the other day." "If you hadn't been there," Clara cut him off with a shake of her head, "you'd have done the same for me." Jenkins gave a half-smile, clearly unsure if he believed that. "Well, good luck tomorrow." As he left, Clara stood for a moment in the rain, a pouch heavy in her palm. She didn't open it, just slid it into her pocket and continued walking. That night, the barracks buzzed with restless energy. Some recruits polished their gear until the metal gleamed. Others wrote letters home. Clara sat on her bunk, carefully checking each strap and buckle on her kit. She knew storms at sea could turn even the simplest mission into chaos. At lights out, she lay awake, listening to the wind howl outside. Her thoughts wandered not to fear of tomorrow, but to the moment years ago when she'd almost drowned. during a training swim in high school. That had been the first time she learned the truth about panic. It doesn't start in your lungs. It starts in your mind. She wouldn't let that happen tomorrow. At 0330, the squad assembled at the docks, their breath forming white clouds in the cold pre-dawn air. The rain had eased, but the sea was restless, waves slapping against the hulls of the ships. Floodlights bathed the pier in a sterile glow, illuminating the waiting patrol vessel. Captain Harris was already there, speaking quietly with Lieutenant Vega, the navigation officer. When Harris turned to address the recruits, his tone was clipped and direct. This is a patrol intercept operation. Primary objective: investigate and board a vessel flagged for suspicious activity. Rules of engagement are defensive unless ordered otherwise. Expect resistance. No one asked questions. They all knew better. The team moved quickly, loading gear and weapons onto the vessel. Clara took her assigned position near the boarding equipment, alongside Petty Officer Myers, a man who hadn't spoken more than 10 words to her since day 1. He gave her a brief nod, and that was enough. By the time the vessel left the dock, the sun was just starting to hint at the horizon, but the clouds made it impossible to see. The engines roared as they cut through the swells. Halfway to their target location, the radio crackled. "This is command to Eagle 1. Be advised target vessel's transponder went dark 10 minutes ago. Last known coordinates have been updated." "Lieutenant." Vega responded calmly, but Clara noticed the shift in the crew's body language. Transponders don't just go dark unless someone wants to hide. They spotted the vessel just after 600, a rust-streaked trawler listing slightly to one side, barely visible against the rolling waves. There was no flag, no movement on deck. "Boarding team, prepare," Harris ordered. The vessel drew alongside, close enough for the grappling equipment. Myers clipped his harness to the boarding line. Clara did the same. As they swung over the gap between ships, the smell hit first oil, seawater, and something metallic. Clara landed on the trawler's deck with a thud, scanning her sector. No sign of life. "Clear the stern." Kane's voice came over comms. They moved methodically, boots clanging on rusted metal. The crew quarters were empty, bunks unmade, but no personal effects. It was as if the ship had been abandoned mid-voyage. Then, in the hold, they found it. Crates, dozens of them marked with a foreign manufacturer's code. Myers pried one open with his multi-tool, and Clara's stomach tightened at the sight inside. Sealed weapons components, the kind not meant for civilian hands. Before they could secure the hold, the radio crackled again, this time with urgent static. "Eagle 1. This is command. 2 unidentified vessels inbound to your position at high speed." Kane's voice cut in, sharp. "All teams, prepare for possible hostile engagement. Secure the cargo and get topside." Clara's pulse quickened as she followed Myers up the narrow stairs, the sound of engines growing louder outside. On deck, the wind had picked up, driving sheets of spray into their faces. The approaching vessels were now visible fast boats, sleek and armed, cutting through the waves like sharks. Captain Harris didn't hesitate. Weapons ready. "Do not fire unless fired upon, but be ready." The first shot came seconds later, a burst from the lead boat's mounted gun, splintering wood just feet from Clara's position. "Return fire!" Kane roared. The next minutes blurred into controlled chaos shouts over the comms, the deafening crack of rifles, the sea bucking beneath them. Clara found herself taking cover behind a steel crate, sighting her weapon through the spray. She squeezed the trigger, her shots merging with the storm of noise. The lead boat veered off under the assault, but the second pressed closer. Grappling hooks clanged against the trawler's rails boarding attempts. Clara didn't think, she just moved, kicking one hook loose before its user could secure it. In that moment, something shifted. She wasn't just the scarred recruit trying to prove herself anymore. She was part of the defense, part of the fight. The second boat pulled back after a final exchange, disappearing into the fog. Silence settled over the deck, broken only by the slap of waves and the ragged breathing of the team. Captain Harris gave the order to secure the vessel and prepare for tow. Clara exhaled slowly, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the adrenaline ebbing away. As they began the long trip back to base, Kane passed her on deck. "Not bad, recruit," he said quietly. For the first time since arriving, Clara allowed herself a small, genuine smile. The air aboard the USS Franklin felt different that morning, thicker somehow, charged with the kind of pressure sailors recognized before a storm. It wasn't just the looming clouds on the horizon. It was the undercurrent of tension that had been building since Lieutenant Harper's return from the mission. Isabella "Izzy" Torres stood on the deck, her gaze fixed on the slate-gray waves. Her posture was rigid, but her fingers tapped an anxious rhythm against the railing. She'd faced hostile seas and enemy fire before, but this was different. The danger now was internal. In the weeks since they'd returned, whispers had begun. Again, not the cruel jabs about her scars from before, but quieter, sharper murmurs. The crew respected her now, but there were still those who couldn't reconcile her rapid rise in Harper's trust with the rigid hierarchy of the Navy. Petty Officer Lane, for one, hadn't forgiven her. He leaned against the bulkhead near the mess hall, arms folded, watching her as she came in. "Looks like the captain's favorite gets breakfast first," he muttered, just loud enough for the others in line to hear. A few chuckled under their breath, more out of habit than malice. Izzy didn't bite. She'd learned silence was sometimes the sharper blade. She got her tray, sat in the far corner, and pretended the food didn't taste like ash in her mouth. Harper had noticed. That afternoon, she called Izzy to her cabin. The blinds were drawn, the air filled with the faint scent of coffee and salt. "Sit," Harper ordered, but her tone lacked the usual steel. Izzy obeyed. Harper studied her for a moment, then leaned forward. "You think I don't hear it?" "The rumors?" Izzy's jaw tightened. "They don't matter." "They do," Harper countered, her voice sharp now. "Because they affect your unit cohesion, and cohesion wins wars." Izzy stared at the table. "What do you want me to do? Fight them? Laugh it off?" "I've done both before. It doesn't stick." Harper's eyes softened, though her tone didn't. "Then we give them something else to talk about." Izzy looked up. Puzzled. Harper pulled out a sealed envelope and slid it across the table. "Orders. You and I are being reassigned to a joint Navy-Marine special training exercise on Blackwater Island. We leave at 06:00 tomorrow." Izzy frowned. "Blackwater? That's off the books." "Exactly," Harper said. "And the kind of place where you prove, without question, that you belong here. Blackwater Island wasn't on most maps. Those who trained there came back harder, sharper, or they didn't come back at all. Without the journey, there was quiet, the kind of quiet that came before a storm, literal and otherwise." When the transport boat finally docked, Izzy's boots sank slightly into the wet sand. Ahead, the dense tree line concealed whatever trials awaited them. They didn't wait long to find out. The first exercise was a simulated hostage rescue in hostile terrain, with live fire rounds and no margin for error. The hostages were deep inside the island swamp, guarded by veteran Marines whose sole mission was to make failure inevitable. Harper and Izzy moved like clockwork through the thick brush, Harper signaling with quick hand gestures, Izzy scanning every shadow. Twice they came under sudden attack, and twice Izzy's reflexes saved them, once with a perfectly timed dive, once with a burst from her rifle that hit its target dead-center. By the time they reached the final checkpoint, they were mud-soaked, sweat-streaked, and breathing hard. The Marine playing the hostage gave a grudging nod. Not bad, Navy. But Harper wasn't smiling. She'd seen something during the exercise's shadow, trailing them at a distance, moving too deliberately. To be part of the game. That night, the storm broke. Rain lashed the island, and the barracks rattled with every gust. Most of the trainees were asleep or pretending to be, but Harper and Izzy sat in the dim light of the operations tent, reviewing maps and notes. Then Harper heard it again. Faint crunch of boots on gravel outside, moving too slowly for anyone on regular patrol. She motioned for Izzy to kill the light. The tent plunged into darkness. A silhouette paused just outside the flap. For a moment, all they heard was the rain. Then the flap shifted slightly, as if someone were checking to see if they were inside. Harper moved first, drawing her sidearm and yanking the flap open. No one. Just darkness, rain, and the faint swaying of the trees. Izzy stepped out beside her, scanning. Could be a Marine messing with us. Could be, Harper said, but her voice was cold. Or it could be someone who doesn't want us finishing this exercise. The next day, the stakes doubled. The final challenge was a multi-phase endurance and combat gauntlet. 48 hours, minimal rest, simulated enemy engagements, and the requirement to carry a 60-pound pack the entire time. By hour 20, most of the trainees were dragging their feet. By hour 30, several had dropped out entirely. But Harper and Izzy pressed on, their movements synchronized, their words few but steady. It was during the last leg, with the extraction point in sight, that it happened. A sudden burst of gunfire, too. Close, too precise to be part of the exercise. One round tore through the strap of Izzy's pack, spinning her sideways. She hit the mud hard. Harper was over her in an instant, returning fire toward the tree line. Up! Move! She barked. They sprinted the last 100 yards under cover fire from a startled Marine instructor. When they reached the extraction zone, Harper didn't wait. She turned on the instructor. That wasn't part of the drill, she said flatly. The instructor's expression was unreadable. No, it wasn't. That night, Harper filed a secure report, bypassing the normal chain of command. Whatever was happening on Blackwater wasn't just training, it was personal. And if someone was trying to take Izzy out, Harper intended to find them first. Izzy, meanwhile, sat alone on her bunk, tracing the torn strap of her pack with her fingers. She didn't need Harper to tell her the truth she already knew. This wasn't about proving she belonged anymore. This was about survival. The night on Blackwater Island was thick with fog, and every sound was magnified in the unnatural silence. Harper and Izzy moved cautiously through the dense underbrush, flashlights piercing the darkness in narrow beams. The simulated training. Exercise had devolved into something real, something deadly. Their comms were down, cut, or jammed, and neither could risk calling for backup. Their only option was to find whoever was trying to take them out before it was too late. Harper's hand hovered near her sidearm as Izzy scanned left and right, every muscle coiled, ready to react. The island seemed to close in around them, shadows morphing into threats at every turn. Suddenly, a soft rustle to their right. Izzy froze and signaled Harper. Both dropped to one knee, weapons raised. The rustling grew louder, then abruptly stopped. A whisper in the dark. Who's there? Harper called, voice low but firm. No answer. Izzy edged forward slowly, her breath steady despite the adrenaline. A figure emerged from the fog, a man clad in black tactical gear, face obscured by a balaclava. His weapon was raised, but not pointed. Hold, he said urgently. We're not your enemies. Harper and Izzy exchanged wary glances, but kept their weapons trained on the figure. Explain, Harper demanded. The man pulled back his hood, revealing a sharp face, tired eyes. Petty Officer Lane, The same man who had sneered at Izzy days before. Lane's voice was hoarse. "Look, I know how it looks, but someone's been trying to sabotage this whole operation. I found evidence of unauthorized surveillance and tampering with the gear." Izzy lowered her weapon slightly, disbelief mingling with relief. "Why? Didn't you say anything before?" Lane swallowed hard. "Because I didn't know who to trust. And now it's clear. They want us out permanently." Harper's mind raced. They were deeper into a conspiracy than she'd imagined. "Come with us," she said. "We need to regroup and figure out our next move." Back at their makeshift camp, Harper, Izzy, and Lane spread out the evidence. Broken sensors, encrypted. Messages intercepted from unknown sources, and tampered supplies. The scope of the threat was far beyond simple sabotage. It was an insider operation aimed at undermining their entire training command. Lane's information was crucial, but the question remained, who was behind it? Harper's gaze lingered on a small detail, a symbol scratched into one of the broken sensors. It matched the insignia she'd seen once before, years ago, during a classified briefing. A mark of a rogue faction within the Navy, an extremist. Group believed to have been dismantled, but apparently still active underground. "This isn't just about us," Harper said grimly. "It's about control, power." Izzy's scars tingled as if echoing the silent threat. She knew the fight was far from overgot. As dawn approached, the trio prepared to move out, intending to confront the saboteurs directly. The island's oppressive fog lifted slowly, revealing the dense jungle that concealed enemy positions. With Lane guiding them through hidden trails, Harper and Izzy steeled themselves for a battle that could decide their fate and the future of the Navy's most secretive operations. The early morning sun barely pierced the dense canopy of Blackwater Island as Harper, Izzy, and Lane moved cautiously toward the coordinates where the sabotage seemed to originate. The jungle was a labyrinth of shadows and shifting sounds, every step a test of nerves and training. "Stay sharp," Harper whispered, her voice steady despite the weight on her shoulders. "This ends today." Izzy tightened her grip on her rifle. Scars beneath the rolled sleeve itched in a familiar way, like a warning from the past. She thought of the 83 seconds that had changed everything, the moments she'd stood alone against impossible odds. Today, she would need every bit of that steel dot lane led them down a narrow path, one barely visible through the undergrowth. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shifted, a wire nearly invisible. "Tripwire," Lane hissed. "Explosives. We're close." Harper knelt, carefully disarming the device with practiced hands. "Good eye," she said. "We can't afford mistakes." Ahead, the thick brush gave way to a small clearing. Harper signaled for silence as the trio slowed to a crawl. There, illuminated by the early light filtering through the trees, was a makeshift command post. Laptops, radios, and weapons littered the area, proof of an operation far more organized than they'd imagined. Suddenly, voices echoed from the perimeter. They ducked behind a fallen log, watching as 4 men and 2 women in tactical gear moved about, discussing plans in low tones. Harper's eyes narrowed. "They're the ones." Izzy's heart pounded, but her stance remained steady. "We take them down quietly, or it's over before it begins." Lane nodded. "Agreed. I know the layout. Let me guide you." The plan was quick and brutal. Approach. From opposite sides, disable communications, and neutralize targets with precision. Izzy crept to the left flank, senses heightened, every nerve firing. She spotted a guard scanning the perimeter and waited for the perfect moment. When he turned away, she moved silently behind him, a quick chokehold rendering him unconscious. Harper moved to the right, taking down 2 operators with deft moves, honed over years of combat. Lane disabled the radios, cutting off any chance of calling for reinforcements. Chaos erupted the moment their presence was revealed. Shots rang out, echoing through the trees as the saboteurs scrambled to respond. Izzy fired from cover, her shots precise and controlled, each one taking down a threat without wasting a bullet. One of the women lunged toward her, knife drawn. Izzy sidestepped, delivering a crushing elbow strike to the attacker's ribs, followed by a swift takedown. Harper was locked in a brutal fight, her opponent strong and relentless, but her training and willpower proved superior. With a final decisive move, she disarmed the man and pinned him to the ground. Lane radioed in. "Area secure, but we've got a problem. The leader is missing." Suddenly, the underbrush exploded as a figure emerged, tall, imposing, and cold-eyed. The leader stepped forward, weapon drawn, voice dripping with menace. "You should have stayed out of this," he said, smirking. Harper leveled her rifle, voice unwavering. "It's over." The standoff stretched for agonizing seconds before the leader lunged. The fight was swift, brutal, and desperate. Izzy intercepted a fatal blow aimed at Harper, taking the hit herself. Pain exploded through her side, but she pushed forward, using the injury as fuel. With a final coordinated effort, they subdued the leader. Breathing heavily, Harper knelt beside Izzy. "You okay?" Harper asked, worry bleeding into her voice. Izzy managed a grim smile. "I've been worse. The sabotage ring was dismantled that day." Classified documents revealed a faction within the Navy seeking to destabilize command and seize power through covert operations. Harper and Izzy's courage and resilience had uncovered the truth. Days later, back at base, Harper received commendations for leadership, Izzy for valor, and Lane for crucial intelligence. But more importantly, they'd earned the respect of their comrades and forged an unbreakable bond. Izzy stood on the deck once more, scars still aching, but spirit unbroken. The 83 seconds had long since passed, but their echo remained, a testament to quiet strength rewriting the rules.